Hello, my name is Elle, and I'm the host of a system called the Mage System. Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about host resistance, something that's been on my mind a lot as a host in DID, and how harmful it can be. And I just think that people should talk about it more. So, yeah, let's just get into it. But first of all, thank you for watching. So, host resistance is like basically something that is talked about a lot in DID, but the term host resistance is something I learned from a doctor called Dr. Ross, Dr. Colin Ross, which is like a pretty influential like DID like psychiatrist person who studies it. I actually like fun fact I met him one time. I had like a session with him and we did talk about DID and stuff, but he did spend like a little bit of a disproportionate amount of time like trying to convince me not to get top surgery. And eventually Elena switched in. I forgot what she said, but she said something pissy. Anyways, that was really unrelated, but he's old, okay? Basically, host resistance is something that happens in DID where the host of the system will deny the existence of their DID and basically just convince themselves that it's not real or not bad or not important. So, firstly, let me just describe what a host is to you because I think the way people describe it sometimes doesn't feel right to me. You'll often hear the idea that the host is the alter that's out the most often. However, that's not how I think about it, and that's not what makes sense to me. And the way I see it, the host is the alter that is responsible for taking care of everyday life. If some person is asking you who the main one is or who the first one is, they're probably trying to ask you who the host is, but failing. Obviously, the host isn't the original, and I do not agree with core theory, which I have a video about that if you don't know what I'm talking about. And also, hosts can change throughout a DID system's life, and they're certainly not the main one. And in order to explain this, let me tell you something. The host is like Colonel Sanders. They're just on the sign. They represent the building. They're the figurehead. However, they're no less of an alter than any of the other alters. Without a CEO, a marketing person, a bookkeeper, a janitor, there is no KFC. I just wanted to say that I think as a host, we'll get into this, it's very tempting to subconsciously assume that you're the main one, and that's also bad. Why is host resistance a thing? Well, number one, it's a survival tactic. If you are aware that you have DID, then you are suddenly aware that these bad things did happen to you that you are trying, that or your system is trying to protect you from. So it makes sense for the host to not be aware. Also, it is extremely beneficial for the host to do their job handling everyday life if they don't know they have DID, because then they're the absolute perfect mask. They're a cover up that isn't even aware that they're a cover up. And a big symptom of DID is denial, that you have DID, especially by the host, which is often met by the other alters with, yes, we are real, actually. I think another reason why host resistance is so prominent, and I wish people would talk about this more, because everybody often talks about the internal worlds of people with DID and not so much what that's like for you on the outside and how society impacts the way your system works. Because I think one of the biggest reasons for host resistance is the fact that as hosts, we are told our whole life, you are one person. Who are you going to be? What are you going to do with your life? It's all about you as a host. And so to have come so far in processing yourself as one person, it is extremely difficult to try and grasp that you are both one person and your being is multiple people. And I think that's really important to remember, is that it would be a head fuck for anybody. With that being said, now we're going to be talking about why host resistance sucks and is just not good, and that if you have host resistance, I feel for you. And it's definitely something we as hosts have to take as a responsibility to try and make better. because it can be really hurtful on other alters if you don't work on it. So something common that happens is that whenever host resistance happens, alters might feel sad or upset or abandoned, and they may often try to get the host's attention by trying to front at inappropriate times that are impossible for the host to ignore, buying stuff or doing things to just generally get the host's attention. However, for me, our system is a lot more avoidant, and it just sort of simply puts a rift in our relationship, which reminds me I need to check Simply Plural because I think Alina told me something. Sometimes whenever the host accepts that they have DID, they're like, I want to get fused. I want to fuse everyone, and they think that that's what they want. However, they neglect the fact that that's not just your decision. Again, there are multiple people in your body that have multiple ideas. I have tried for ages to work with Alina in therapy, to improve something there. And God, every single therapist that has worked with Alina and I on this has not gotten anywhere. And I think I just realized, like, she literally told me the other day, she's like, Elle, I don't know how many times I have to say this, but I have a system that works and I like the way that I am. And I don't want to change that. And so obviously if that alters behavior is like actively like harming the system or the body or something, that's one thing. But you have to realize as a host that you can't force anything to happen. Not that I was trying to get Alina to fuse or anything, but I think sometimes a host wants to get all fused, but what they really mean is they just want to get rid of their alters because they don't want DID. And it's you really have to feel the feelings and deal with the conflict and not try to run away from that. And it's hard. So yeah, I remember that like Dr. Ross called this fusion by or integration by firing squad. Um, it doesn't work. You're just going to send your alters into dormancy. You may think they integrated, but they probably actually just went dormant because your subconscious was like, oh, you don't want this person around, which is just so sad. Another thing that is also harmful about hosts sometimes in the way they behave is that we sometimes have the tendency to really pathologize the other alters and say, this one does this one does this, while ignoring our own problems because we still are under the impression that the things that we do with our body and with our minds that are unhealthy aren't affecting anybody but us as a host, while neglecting to take into account that you actually live in a body with several other people. So there's one thing. Like, for example, you have an alter that self-harms on the body, something like that. And it's something you take huge note of. You're like, this alter must be a persecutor because they self-harm and X, Y, and Z, and it's this dark trait about them, whatever. And that's kind of a really odd way of approaching the situation and kind of like shitty because what if you self-harm as a host? Like, because you might, are you going to be treating it the same way? Are you going to be treating it as you're harming the rest of the system by doing this to your body? Probably not, because as a host, you are still in the mindset that if I harm myself, it's okay. Whereas other alters are somehow tasked to be more mindful that there are other people in the system, but you're somehow immune to it. You have to try and break your brain out of those patterns. It's not your fault that you think that way as a host, but it is your duty to try and do right by your system by trying to fix this about yourself. You have to make a serious commitment to forming a team. And yeah, I think once you start acknowledging your alters more, that already lets up a lot of tension, because sometimes whenever alters don't feel acknowledged by the host, it leads to more flashbacks, other negative symptoms. And once you just simply start by acknowledging that they're real, it can get better. But I will say that as a host, it can feel frustrating sometimes if you're like, okay, I want to do this, I want to commit, but it still feels like the other alters don't trust you. Um, that sucks. But it's also important to realize that that's for a reason and that it makes sense for the alters to not just trust the host just because they say that they want to do this. The host has to show them. You have to put in a lot of work in order to do this. So, my experience with host resistance is of very, very much of it. And it's weird too because I am an integration amalgamation between the OG host and two other alters. So I should know, right? But I don't. And it's like I at this point I'm cognitively aware that I have DID. Like I have no other way. Like I have all the proof that I need. I literally have everything. I have all the evidence, but I still don't feel like I do. I just really don't. And honestly, I think that it might simply just be impossible for me to grasp. I'm not sure. Like it might just be impossible for me to grasp it entirely. Um, yeah, I think every time I see a symptom of my DID, there's always like a bunch of like intrusive thoughts in the back of my head that like, oh, I'm faking because I can see this or whatever, or I've convinced myself or something. But as I've gotten better throughout the years at distinguishing actual things that make sense and things that are intrusive thoughts, it gets harder and harder to ignore that this is real. And it just sucks because as a host and my job being to move through life, all that I want to do is just say that I'm over trauma and I hate talking about it. I hate thinking about it. I don't want to think about it. And acknowledging that your DID is real means thinking about that and acknowledging that maybe you don't feel fucked up by your trauma, but your body does because there are other people in it that do. So, yeah. So, if you're a resistant host, I feel for you. Um, yeah. Thank you for watching my channel. Subscribe. We make a lot of fun and interesting content here. I always try to say things that people haven't said before or expand on things that I think need to be expanded on. I like to make fresh videos with fresh ideas in them. And yeah, thank you for watching. I'm sorry, I feel like my videos lately don't have like the same energy that they used to. I'm like so depressed. It's hard for me to like talk very well. Anyways, I didn't edit this for a while because I didn't want to look at myself because I'm just depressed.